Hi there. Today we will talk about another React hook called useReducer. useReducer do the exactly same thing as the useState hook does. So the task is to manage the React state. So then what is the difference between the useState and useReducer? The difference is that useState hook used to manage simple state and useReducer used to manage complex state. Let's see an example. We already covered the how can we use the useState hook in our earlier video, and I create a button, and inside the button I attach a handler and we call the useState method inside that handler, and every time I click this button my counter value will increase. So let's see how can we achieve the same result with useReducer hook. So replace the useState hook with useReducer hook. So let's import useReducer hook. useReducer hook take two arguments. First one, a function that manages all the state value, and second one is the initial state value. Let's create these two functions outside of my component. The reducer function get two arguments. First one is state and second one is action. The initial value that we pass inside our useReducer hook second argument, that value will be available in our useReducer function's first argument. That means my state value is currently 1, and whatever value we pass inside this method, that this value will be available in our action argument. That means the second method. So how can we achieve this countdown similar thing with this useReducer hook? For that must have written something state plus action. Now I need to pass the action value with 1. That means my state value is 1, and every click I will pass the 1. That means it will increase 1 by every click. So if I save my file, if I click this button, I can see I have achieved the same result with useReducer hook as we did in the useState hook. So the useReducer hook is used to manage the complex state. So let's see how can we create our example little bit complex. For we can pass, instead of single value we can pass an object like name, Riazul, my name, and the skills and array developer. Now this value will be available when I click this button. So my action value will be this value. So if I remove the state value, action value, my initial value will be the initial value. So that means my state value will be the initial value. Let's convert this to an object. So if I save my file, it will throw an error because my state value is now count. So and I cannot use the object inside my JSX. So let's remove this line and console log console log count. Actually this value will be no more count because it is an object. So let's name it an user and dispatch. The value name is state value name is user and the function name is dispatch. So the function name will be dispatch. We can give any name, but it is very common when we use useReducer hook. It is very common to use dispatch method name as a dispatch. So use the user here. So I do not pass anything, just pin the initial state value. Let's see. Actually, or I can put this line here. Now we can see that we have a empty object. That means the initial value. Now if I pass the action value that we mentioned in our dispatch function, we will get action value. So remove this line. If I click this button, I can see I get the dispatch method as my action argument. So in real world scenario, we do not have an empty object. We have something inside this object. For example, I have an loading is equal to false, this value. So what we need copy the original state and then add the value in our action. That means action. Now if I save my file and again click this button, actually let's print this output instead of console. Let's print here. For that, why we convert this just stringify? Because we already covered that we cannot insert any object in a JSX element. So we must convert that object into string. So I convert this object into string. So let's see our result in a beautiful way. For that, pd command and with the 2 space. Now we can see my output looks nice. Now we pass an object, but this phenomenon or this type of example can be handled with useState hook. But then what is the difference? The difference is that we can use complex state. That means let's make our object little bit complex. Type is equal to request state and payload is an object. Now if I save my file, I click my button, I can see my object. Actually, to refresh the file, remove the line, I can see my initial value. If I click this button, I can see my full object. Nice. Now why we use this format? The reason is that when we use Redux, then this type of syntax will be very familiar. So that is the reason I format in this way. So let's check. We put a type attribute. That means we can check if my request is if my type is requested, then I will handle this way. Suppose when we fetch API request, then API can have 3 states, either request fail or success, or my request is currently sending, so that we can show a loading state in my application. So for that I need to change based on I need to create our state by checking the type of this my display method option. For that use a switch case. Actually remove this default value. Switch case is the action.type, because we check based on this type method, type property, so it will be in action. So action.type is equal to and case. So case will be if the case is requested, return something, and default is the default case must be return the state. That means this value. So the output of my state is copy this line to here. So when we create when our result means our type is requested, then we do not pass anything in my payload, and we need to create our loading flag to true. That means our request is going to backend. So make our request to true. For that loading is equal to true. Now if I save my file, if I click this button, I can see my loading is converted to true. Actually refresh the page, my initial value is false, but if I click this button, my value is true. So it is the first method. Now when my request is success, then I have to create the same method, and this time I return my response return something. So we must apply type is equal to, suppose for this succeed, and so actually not type will be here, succeed, and value will be name and the skill. Now let's handle we only handle this requested method. Let's handle in success method. To handle this success method, I have to create another case. That means case is equal to succeed. If case is equal to succeed, then return something, return an object. Let's copy this two line, and this time we must change the loading state to false, because our state is our request succeed, and the value comma this line, and the value will be the action.payload, because this time we pass some data, action.payload. We know that action.payload is an object, so to make this object I have to create copy. So now value is succeed. If I save my file, actually I create the two options. If I click this button, it happens, but immediately, so I cannot see what's going on. For that, let's add a useState. Timeout, not this one. actually set timeout. One minute. We try to create a delay time so that I can see that my state value changing from loading then false. First save my file. If this time click this button, I can see this value is false then true. This value is true then false. That means at first it handle this line, and after that wait for 1 second and handle to convert that our to false. So let's make this value in my button, that means success. So where the button is success, replace this success with, because my user state user has this object, so user dot loading is true, then show success, else show failed loading. If save my file, I can see it is loading. Actually is loading success, is loading true then success, not is loading true then loading. Else success. Now if I click this button, I can see loading appears and then success. That means in our real life scenario happens this type of scenario. So we handle two separate things with the useReducer hook by the condition. So let's check what happens when we miss or fix error, or actually let's check a real API. For that I have a API. This is a JSON placeholder. If you go to this website, you can get this API. It is a pre-built API. In our API tutorial, we will discuss about this API, what is the API and how can we handle that. So in our request handler, let's comment out these two things, and in my request handler fetch, actually I have complete the full section. So fetch, and this fetch is a promise, so I have to then response and convert that response to JSON. Now this fetch returns promise, so user I have to await hot ID constant and await and make our function asynchronous. So my value is get users, so let's pass the get user value in my success parameter. So let's uncomment this line, remove timeout section, and inside this payload I have the my payload is equal to the get user, so I can use user. So if I save my file and click this user button, I can see actually I get the to do. So instead of to do, let's change this to users, because in JSON placeholder, JSON API has some endpoint and one of them is user. So refresh the page and click this user button, I get the user details. Now in our real world scenario, what we have, we get the first method to check that to add a loading flag. So we already create the loading in our application, and let's first method for loading. That means now this will be called before our API, and this method will be called when our API succeeds. So we already handled this succeed API subset request here. So if I save my file, if I click this button, this happened very quickly, actually very quickly. So let's, how can we handle, actually if we what happens when our request fails. That means if I type something mistype, like type code 5 or 0 or 1, type code 1, that means this is not a valid URL anymore. So if I click this button, refresh the page, if I click this button, it crashes because we do not handle the error when our response promise failed. We do not handle that, does not handle this. So if I go to my console, I can see that uncaught promise handler. So let's fix this promise handler. For that, I am using a await keyword, that means a async function. So I can handle this error with try catch block and put our code inside the try block and copy this line and make here. And when it will fail, that means instead of request failed, we pass the error message, that means error dot message. So our payload will be error is equal to error dot message, because error always have a error message. So if I save my file and refresh this page, if click this button, I can see it is still loading. It will be failed because my example is wrong. That is, instead of code, let's type here 1 and reload page again. If I click this button, it shows the error and it do not stopping the loading. That means we do not handle this step. Actually, if we console log this output here for now, error dot message, refresh the page, click this button, we can see the error message here. So we want this error message will be appear here, and we will also handle this error, that means in fail state. So remove this line, go to fail state, that means go to there here and check the if case is equal to failed, then return something. What we return the initial state as it is, but this time make sure our loading is false. So is false. And now when our request fail, we must pass error message. That means our payload is not empty this time. Our payload has an error message. So capture this error message and action dot payload has the error message. If I save my file, now if I click this button and request is false, then it immediately comes back to original state. That means actually do not success. We no need to show the success. For that, let's manage this button, actually success. If it is loading, that loading. If it is failed, then if user dot error message, that means we already create this method. So let's add this method in our loading state. So error default value is empty, that means nothing. So in my error, if error, then show text failed, else show success. Actually I type the mistype. Now if I save my file, it shows now fails. If I click this button, it shows failed. That means our request is failing. Now instead of showing error message here, let's show an error message beneath the button. So a small is equal to user.error. Now if I save this file, it will appear always. If there is no error, still it will be appear, but we need to only show this error method when our error appears. So for that I have to user.error. If user.error available only, then show or compile or add this tag. So if we refresh the file, now we do not have any tag. If we click this button, now our error appears here. That means we handling the error properly. Close this line tag. So in our real life scenario, this happens because at first we need some loading, and then we need, if our request succeed, then do something, and if request fail, then do something. And this type of phenomena only can possible to handle by useReducer hook, and this is the format. Actually I use the real world scenario instead of any dummy example. So let's fix the 1 to as so that it works, and check what's happened. It returns. Actually I have to click the button. Now I can see the output, and if I type any mistype, then our instead of output, this time we need do not show the output, instead just error message. So I have to empty this object in my error section. That means in error, that means when it fails, make my state is equal to empty. That means we do not need to copy anything, just this line. That means it will overwrite or make our state value this way. So if I click this button, it fails, and when this fails, click this button, it fails, and it remove my user data. For example, let's correct the example again. Placeholder. Let's save and click this button. I can see my data, and if I remove the R and click this button, I can see my data is removed and the error appears. So this is the use case of useReducer. So we can manage any complex data, complex state with the useReducer hook. Now actually the useReducer hook has another use with another hook. React has another hook called useContext. So when we use at first we learn the useContext, and after that we will use this useReducer hook in our useContext hook, so that we can understand our useReducer hook a lot more, even more clearly. So thanks.